It's not often that my enthusiasm for Charles Darwin intersects with my love of another famous author, but this week it did. I was running a workshop about what pharmaceutical and medtech markets will look like in the medium term when I found myself quoting Darwin alongside John Wyndham, the author of Day of the Triffids and other science fiction classics. It was an odd juxtaposition, but it has lessons for how you might lead your business for the future, so bear with me while I try to share those lessons. Darwinian evolution is a scientific explanation of how complex adaptive systems change. It applies to biological systems, which inspired Darwin, of course, but also to business environments, which fascinates me. If you have any kind of science background, you'll know that good scientific theories both explain the past and predict the future. The entire life sciences business sector is built on using scientific explanations to predict what will happen if we intervene in a patient's biology. That's so obvious that we barely think about it. Darwinian evolution is a strong theory, very well tested in biology. But the question is, can we use Darwinian thinking to predict where, for example, the pharmaceutical, medtech and other life science sectors are headed? Well, yes and no. No, because the industry is so complex. We just don't have the models clever enough to, for example, predict next year's sales. Just like we don't have models clever enough to predict the exact weather a month from now. But yes, in the sense that it can tell us where to look for signs of the future emerging, just as climate models tell us where to look for nascent tornadoes, for example. Now, knowing where to look for the future is where Charles Darwin intersects with John Wyndham. Wyndham wrote a wonderful short story called Pawley's Peepholes about rather vulgar tourists from the future coming to go up at the present. And of course, that allowed the present to glimpse into the future. It's a great story and I recommend it to you, but its value to me was as a metaphor. See, in my workshop, I used it to explain to the delegates that instead of trying to use evolutionary science as a forecasting machine, it's much better to use it as a peephole into the future. So, biologists and ecologists use evolution to glimpse a future of raised global temperatures, reduced biodiversity, and if we're not careful, food and water shortages. In the same way, management scientists of the Darwinian persuasion, of which I'm one, can use it to gain imperfect but useful glimpses into the future of complex changing industries such as ours. So let's get practical. Evolutionary science allows you to anticipate how the selection pressures of an environment are changing. This enables a second-order prediction of the consequences. So, for example, if we think a habitat will get drier, we can be reasonably sure that drought-resistant species will thrive at the expense of thirsty species. In my book, Darwin's Medicine, I identified 6 major shifts in the life sciences environment and used those to predict, amongst other things, speciation of business models in pharma and medtech. Those predictions have turned out to be true. So that's a big picture, strategic way of using Darwinian evolution to guide the adaptation of your business to a changing business environment. But there are other more immediate uses too. For example, one of the 6 shifts, the value shift, predicted that peers would change how they define value. So that's a cue for strategic planners to look for signs of it happening, and lo and behold, look at how China is now demanding value comparisons against best-in-class, not also-ran competitors. That's a peephole into future peer strategies. In the same way, the information shift told strategists to look for the emergence of telehealth in developing economies. If you want a peephole into that future, take a look at what Indonesia is doing to cope with the demands of COVID. Likewise, the holobiont shift alerts us to look for unusual alliances designed to create novel value. And sure enough, what GE Healthcare and Sophia are doing is just one example of that. Anticipating the future is obviously important to leading long-term business, but it's hard. Not because we can't see what's happening, but because we can see so much happening. We need to be able to differentiate the noise in the market from the signs of an emerging future. And that's what evolutionary science gives us, peepholes into the future.